Imagine a world on the cusp of revolution, a world of powdered wigs, grand estates, and radical new ideas brewing just beneath the surface. It's into this world, in the year 1751, that one of America's most brilliant minds was born. But our story doesn't begin in a bustling city or on a battlefield. It starts quietly, in a humble home at Port Conway, Virginia, on a brisk March day. This is the story of James Madison, but not the statesman you think you know. This is the story of the boy before the man, the reader before the leader. The Madison family wasn't new to Virginia. They had deep roots in the rich, red soil of the colony. But for little James, his world truly began to take shape when the family moved inland to a sprawling plantation nestled in the rolling hills of Orange County. They called it Montpelier. Today, we might picture it as a grand, columned mansion. But back then, it was a more modest, though still substantial, brick home surrounded by the vastness of the Virginia Piedmont. This was the landscape of his youth fields of tobacco, the distant silhouette of the Blue Ridge Mountains, and the constant hum of life and labor on a southern plantation. Unlike many of his Virginian contemporaries, young James wasn't a boy of rugged, outdoor pursuits. You wouldn't find him leading hunts or excelling in sports. From his earliest days, he was plagued by a delicate constitution. His health was fragile, and he suffered from what were then described as bilious indispositions and episodes that resembled epileptic seizures. This physical frailty, which would follow him throughout his life, had a profound and defining impact. It pushed him inward, away from the physical world and into the limitless world of the mind. While other boys were learning to ride and shoot, James was learning to read and reason. The library at Montpelier became his sanctuary and his playground. His father, James Madison Sr., was a prosperous planter and a man who valued education. He made sure his son had access to the great works of the time. James devoured them all. He wasn't just reading. He was having conversations across centuries with the greatest thinkers in history. He journeyed through ancient Greece with Plato and Aristotle, debated law and governance with Roman statesmen like Cicero, and grappled with the Enlightenment philosophers who were reshaping the very idea of society. Locke, Montesquieu, Voltaire. These books weren't just dusty old volumes to him. They were tools. They were blueprints. He was fascinated by the mechanics of government, the rise and fall of republics, the delicate balance between liberty and order. While the world outside his window was one of crops and commerce, the world inside his head was one of ideas, principles, and grand political theories. His frail health, in a way, was a blessing in disguise. It gave him the one thing a budding intellectual needs most: time. Uninterrupted hours to read, to think, to connect disparate ideas, and to build the deep, foundational knowledge that would one day help him build a nation. His early education was overseen by a series of tutors. One of the most influential was a Scottish man named Donald Robertson, a graduate of the University of Edinburgh. Robertson's school was a crucible of classical learning. For 2 years, James was immersed in Latin, Greek, mathematics, geography, and literature. He wasn't just memorizing facts. He was being trained in the art of critical thinking. Robertson taught him to analyze texts, construct logical arguments, and express himself with clarity and precision. These were the skills of a scholar, and they would soon become the skills of a revolutionary statesman. Even after returning to Montpelier for further tutoring under the Reverend Thomas Martin, his intellectual hunger was insatiable. He wasn't just a passive recipient of information. He was an active, engaged, and often critical reader. He filled the margins of his books with notes, questions, and observations. He was already beginning to synthesize what he was learning, to see the patterns in history, and to think about how the lessons of the past could be applied to the challenges of the futura. Future he couldn't yet imagine, but one he was piece by piece preparing himself to shape. Think about the contrast. In a society that valued land, legacy, and physical prowess, here was a quiet, bookish boy. His companions were not fellow landowners' sons on horseback, but philosophers and historians on the printed page. His arena was not the field of sport, but the field of ideas. This period, from 1751 to 1760 and just beyond, was the quiet beginning. It was the forging of the intellectual engine that would later power the Constitutional Convention. Every intricate argument he would later make for the separation of powers, every carefully crafted clause in the Bill of Rights, has its roots here, in the quiet rooms of Montreal. It was here that James Madison, the small, sickly boy from Orange County, began his transformation. He wasn't just reading about the world. He was developing the intellectual framework through which he would understand it, critique it, and ultimately change it forever. This was the making of a different kind of founder. Not a soldier like Washington, nor a fiery orator like Patrick Henry. Madison was to be the architect, the thinker, the quiet intellectual giant whose power came not from a sword or a booming voice, but from the depth of his knowledge and the force of his reason. And as the 1760s dawned, bringing with them the first rumblings of discontent with British rule, this reflective, deeply intellectual boy was uniquely prepared for the ideological battles that lay ahead. The quiet beginning was over. A new chapter, for both Madison and America, was about to begin. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into history. We've only just scratched the surface, and I can't wait to continue the story of James Madison with you in the next chapter. See you then. Welcome back to our series. Today, in Chapter 2, we're diving deep into the making of a truly brilliant mind. Long before he became a name etched in history, he was a young boy with an insatiable thirst for knowledge. Forget the bustling classrooms we know today. His early education was an intimate affair, guided by private tutors who recognized and nurtured his exceptional intellect from a very young age. This personalized learning environment wasn't just about rote memorization. It was a crucible for critical thinking, laying the groundwork for the intellectual giant he would become. Imagine a childhood where your days are spent debating complex ideas, poring over ancient texts, and having your curiosity encouraged at every turn. This was the world that shaped him, a world where the seeds of greatness were sown in the fertile ground of a disciplined and curious mind. This foundation of rigorous private tutoring prepared him for his next great adventure, the hallowed halls of the College of New Jersey. Now, you might not recognize that name immediately, but I guarantee you know its modern-day counterpart, the prestigious Princeton University. Enrolling there at a remarkably young age, he wasn't just another student. He was a phenomenon. The collegiate environment was a stark contrast to his 101 tutoring, but he thrived amidst the intellectual competition and the vast resources now at his fingertips. He threw himself into his studies with a passion that was legendary even then. His professors and peers quickly saw that this was not just a bright student, but a generational talent. The College of New Jersey would become the stage where his intellectual prowess would truly begin to shine, setting him on a path that would change the course of a nation. So, what exactly was he studying with such intensity? It was a curriculum that reads like a greatest hits of classical and modern thought. He achieved a stunning mastery of languages, not just for communication, but as a key to unlocking the wisdom of different cultures and eras. He devoured Greek and Latin, reading the classics in their original form, but his intellectual appetite didn't stop there. He delved deep into the labyrinthine world of philosophy, wrestling with the fundamental questions of existence, ethics, and human nature that have puzzled thinkers for centuries. Alongside this, he developed a profound understanding of government theory. He wasn't just learning how governments worked. He was analyzing why they succeeded or failed, dissecting the intricate machinery of power, law, and civil society. This potent combination of languages, philosophy, and political theory created a uniquely powerful analytical mind. Perhaps the most crucial element of his education was his profound engagement with the Enlightenment, the intellectual revolution that was sweeping across Europe and the Americas. He wasn't just reading the headlines, he was immersing himself in the source material. Imagine the thrill of discovering the groundbreaking ideas of thinkers like John Locke for the first time. Locke's theories on natural rights, liberty, and property, and the concept of a government built on the consent of the governed would have resonated deeply. These weren't just abstract ideas. They were radical, world-changing concepts. He saw in them a blueprint for a new kind of society, one founded on reason and individual freedom. Locke's writings weren't just homework. They became a cornerstone of his own developing political philosophy, planting the seeds for his future arguments for liberty and self-governance. And then there was Montesquieu. If Locke provided the spirit of the new government, Montesquieu provided the skeleton. The young scholar was captivated by Montesquieu's master, the spirit of the laws, particularly his theory on the separation of powers, the idea of dividing government into distinct legislative, executive, and judicial branches, each with its own responsibilities, and the ability to check the others, was a stroke of genius. It was a practical solution to the age-old problem of tyranny. He understood that this structure wasn't just an elegant design, it was a vital safeguard for liberty. The insights he gleaned from Montesquieu would become absolutely central to his later work, forming the very architecture of a new form of government designed to protect the rights Locke had so eloquently defined. This exposure wasn't passive, it was an active dialogue with the greatest minds of his time. So, let's put all these pieces together. We have a young man, honed by private tutors, sharpened at Princeton, who has mastered the languages of the ancients and the philosophies that define humanity. He then immerses himself in the most revolutionary political ideas of his era, absorbing the principles of natural rights from Locke and the blueprint for a balanced government from Montesquieu. This isn't just about being well-read. This is about the forging of a scholar's mind. He was building an intellectual arsenal, developing a framework through which he could analyze the world and envision a better one. Every book read, every debate had, every theory mastered was another tool in his toolbox. This period of intense study was the critical phase where potential was forged into power, transforming a gifted student into a visionary thinker, ready to apply these profound ideas to the real world. His education did more than just fill his head with facts. It shaped his entire worldview. The Enlightenment's emphasis on reason, empirical evidence, and humanism became his guiding principles. He learned to approach problems not with blind adherence to tradition, but with a sharp, analytical mind. He could deconstruct complex political systems, identify their flaws, and, most importantly, conceptualize innovative solutions. This ability to synthesize vast amounts of information from ancient history to contemporary philosophy and apply it to the pressing issues of the day was his unique superpower. He wasn't just thinking about government, he was rethinking government from the ground up, using the powerful intellectual tools he had so diligently acquired. His mind became a laboratory where the ideas of the Enlightenment could be tested, refined, and prepared for their real-world debut. The scholar we've explored today wasn't just preparing for a career. He was unknowingly preparing for a destiny. The lessons learned in the quiet study with his tutor, the debates had in the halls of Princeton, and the silent conversations he had with Locke and Montesquieu. Across the pages of their books, all of it was converging. This deep intellectual foundation gave him the confidence and the clarity to argue for independence and to design a new form of government. When the moment came to articulate the aspirations of a new nation, he wouldn't be speaking from mere passion, but from a position of profound intellectual authority. His arguments would be sharp, his logic unassailable, and his vision clear, all because of the years he spent cultivating this remarkable scholar's mind. And that concludes our deep dive into the intellectual formation of this great figure. The foundation was now laid. In our next chapter, we'll see how this scholar steps out of the library and into the political arena, beginning to put these revolutionary ideas into practice. The theory is about to meet the real world, and the results will be explosive. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey today. If you enjoyed this exploration and want to see how the story unfolds, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss Chapter 3. We'll see you next time. Welcome back to our journey through the life of James Madison. Today, in Chapter 3, we're diving headfirst into the fire and fervor of the revolutionary spirit. How did a quiet, bookish young man from Virginia become a central figure in a world-changing rebellion? Let's find out. Imagine being a young, intellectually curious individual, and news starts trickling in from across the Atlantic. News of a different way of thinking, of a radical idea that ordinary people had rights that no king could take away. For James Madison, this wasn't just news, it was the spark that would ignite his life's work. The Enlightenment was in full swing, but it was the American Revolution that took these philosophical ideas and made them real, tangible, and worth fighting for. Madison, fresh from his studies at the College of New Jersey, which we now know as Princeton, returned to Virginia in 1772. The air was thick with tension. The Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, The Boston Tea Party each event was a drumbeat getting louder, signaling an inevitable confrontation with Great Britain. Madison, a voracious reader, consumed every pamphlet and political tract he could get his hands on. He saw the struggle not just as a tax dispute, but as a profound battle for the very principle of self. He believed that a government's legitimacy could only come from the consent of the governed. The American colonies, in his view, were being ruled without that consent, and that was a fundamental injustice that had to be corrected. This conviction, born from a blend of intellectual study and real-world events, formed the bedrock of his revolutionary spirit. He wasn't just watching history unfold, he was preparing to shape it. In the vibrant political landscape of revolutionary Virginia, you couldn't throw a stone without hitting a future legend, and Madison found himself in the orbit of two of its brightest stars, Patrick Henry and Thomas Jefferson. These relationships were crucial in transforming Madison from a scholar into a statesman. Let's start with Patrick Henry. Henry was the fire, the voice of the Revolution. His famous "Give me liberty" or "Give me death" speech echoed through the colonies. Madison was nearly 15 years younger, and initially, he was more of an observer. He admired Henry's incredible power to move a crowd with his oratory, even if he personally preferred a more reasoned, logical approach. They were different in style, Henry, the passionate orator; Madison, the careful logician, but they were united in their cause, working alongside Henry in the Virginia legislature. Madison learned invaluable lessons about the art of political persuasion and the power of public sentiment. He saw firsthand how a single, powerful voice could galvanize a population. Then there was Thomas Jefferson. This was a friendship that would define both of their lives and the course of the nation. They were introduced in 1776, and the connection was immediate. They were intellectual equals, sharing a deep passion for philosophy, science, and, most importantly, the principles of liberty and republican government. Jefferson was the elder by 8 years, already a prominent figure as the author of the Declaration of Independence. He became a mentor to Madison. They would spend countless hours in conversation and correspondence, debating the intricacies of governance, the nature of rights, and the ideal structure for a new society. Jefferson valued Madison's sharp, analytical mind and his profound knowledge of history and political theory. Madison, in turn, was inspired by Jefferson's boundless optimism and his visionary ideas. It was a perfect partnership. Jefferson, the architect of grand ideas, and Madison, the master builder who could figure out how to construct them. This bond, forged in the heat of revolution, would become one of the most important political partnerships in American history. While others were leading armies or delivering fiery speeches, Madison's revolution began closer to home, in the local committees and conventions of Virginia. His health was often frail, preventing him from serving in the military, but he wielded a different kind of weapon: his mind and his pen. His political career officially began in 1774 when he was elected to the Orange County Committee of Safety. These committees were the shadow governments of the Revolution, organizing, enforcing boycotts of British goods, and essentially running local affairs in defiance of the royal governor. It was grassroots politics at its most intense. Here, the 23-year-old Madison wasn't just debating theory. He was dealing with the practical, day-to-day challenges of rebellion. He was proving himself to be not just a thinker, but a duo organized, diligent, and deeply committed. His efforts quickly earned him respect. In 1776, a monumental year for the colonies, Madison was elected as a delegate to the Virginia Convention. This was a huge step up. This convention was tasked with drafting a new constitution for Virginia and a Declaration of Rights. It was here that Madison made one of his first and most significant contributions to the cause of liberty. The initial draft of the Virginia Declaration of Rights, written primarily by George Mason, guaranteed the fullest toleration in the exercise of religion. Madison saw a problem with this wording. Toleration, he argued, implied that religious freedom was a gift granted by the state, which could therefore be taken away. He believed religious freedom was a natural, inalienable right, not a privilege. With quiet determination, the young delegate proposed a change in wording. He suggested replacing toleration with the phrase, free exercise of religion. It seems like a small change, but the principle behind it was enormous. It established religious freedom as a fundamental right of the people, not a favor from the government. The convention agreed, and Madison's amendment was adopted. This single act revealed the depth of his thinking and his commitment to individual liberty, a theme that would dominate his entire career. It showed that even at this early stage, James Madison wasn't just participating in the revolution. He was actively shaping its most fundamental ideals. From East-step-seated beliefs sparked by the American Revolution, to the influential friendships with giants like Patrick Henry and Thomas Jefferson, and his crucial early work in Virginia politics, Madison's revolutionary spirit was forged. He wasn't the loudest voice in the room, but his was often the most thoughtful and, ultimately, one of the most enduring. The principles he fought for in those early days in Virginia would soon become the principles he would champion for an entire nation. Thank you so much for joining me for this chapter. The story is just getting started, and the next phase of Madison's life will see him step onto an even larger stage. If you're enjoying this journey, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next episode. We'll see you next time. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our series on the minds that shaped America. Today, we're diving into a crucial, yet often overlooked, period in American history. The era of the Articles of Confederation. Imagine you're part of a team project, but the team leader has no real power to make decisions, can't collect resources from team members, and everyone is just doing their own thing. Sounds like a recipe for disaster, right? Well, that's a pretty good picture of the United States in the 1780s. In our last episode, we saw James Madison's early career taking off. Now, we find him right in the thick of it, serving as a delegate to the Continental Congress. This wasn't just a political position for Madison. It was a front-row seat to a national crisis in slow motion. It was Terry day in and day out, trying to govern a new nation with a rule book that was, to put it mildly, deeply flawed. So, what was the big problem? The Articles of Confederation. This was the first governing document of the United States, adopted during the Revolutionary War. Its main goal was to prevent the kind of powerful, centralized government they had just fought to escape from, the British monarchy. The intention was good. They wanted to protect liberty and state sovereignty. But in doing so, they swung the pendulum way too far in the other direction. Under the Articles, the national government, the Continental Congress, was incredibly weak. Think about this. Congress could declare war, but it couldn't raise an army. It had to ask the states to please, pretty please, send soldiers. Congress could borrow money, but it couldn't levy taxes. It had to request funds from the states, which often paid late, paid only a fraction of what was asked, or sometimes didn't pay at all. Madison saw this firsthand, and it was maddening. He'd witnessed debates over urgent national matters grind to a halt because Congress had no teeth. Imagine trying to pay back war debts to allies like France, or trying to pay your own soldiers when you have no reliable way of getting money. The states were acting like 13 separate, bickering countries, not a united nation. They'd put tariffs on goods from neighboring states. They'd print their own money, creating economic chaos. There was no national unity. For Madison, this wasn't just an inconvenience. It was an existential threat to the republic he had fought for. He saw a nation that was respected abroad for winning the revolution, now becoming a laughingstock. European powers didn't take them seriously. Pirates were preying on American ships because there was no national navy to protect them. The country was falling apart from the inside out. It was during these frustrating years in Congress that the wheels in Madison's brilliant mind really started turning. He wasn't just complaining about the problems. He was dissecting them, analyzing why this system was failing so spectacularly. He realized that the core issue was the lack of federal power. Liberty couldn't survive in chaos. For a nation to be truly free and prosperous, it needed a government that could act decisively for the common good, protect its citizens, and enforce its own laws. He began to exchange letters with other forward-thinking leaders like George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, and Thomas Jefferson. He devoured books on history and political theory, studying the rise and fall of ancient republics in Greece and Rome. He wasn't just looking for a quick fix. He was searching for timeless principles to build a government that would last. A government that could balance power between the national and state levels. A government that derived its authority from the people but was strong enough to guide the nation. This period of frustration and study was the crucible in which Madison's ideas for a new constitution were forged. He was moving beyond simply patching up the articles. He was beginning to imagine something entirely new, a strong, yet limited, republican government. A framework that could unite the states, command respect on the world stage, and secure the blessings of liberty for generations to come. This wasn't just about political theory for him. It was deeply personal. He had seen the sacrifices of the revolution and feared it was all for nothing. The dream of a self-governing republic was on the verge of becoming a nightmare of disunion and anarchy. And James Madison was determined to do something about it. He was starting to sketch out the blueprints for what would become the United States Constitution. And that's where we'll pick up next time. We'll explore the events, like Shays' Rebellion, that pushed the nation to the breaking point and set the stage for the Constitutional Convention, where Madison would earn his title as the father of the Constitution. Thanks so much for watching. If you're finding this journey through history as fascinating as I am, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapter in our story. We'll see ya in the next video. Welcome back to our series on the life and legacy of James Madison. Last time, we left Madison as a rising star in Virginia politics, deeply concerned about the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. Today, in Chapter 5, we explore his vision for a strong republic, a vision that would fundamentally reshape the United States. The mid-1780s were a critical time for the young nation. The government under the Articles of Confederation was teetering on the brink of collapse. It couldn't effectively raise taxes, regulate commerce, or even defend its own borders. States were acting like squabbling independent countries, printing their own money and imposing tariffs on each other. For Madison, this wasn't just inefficient, it was dangerous. He saw the promise of the revolution slipping away, threatened by internal chaos and weakness. From his home at Montpelier and in his correspondence, Madison began to pour his thoughts onto paper. These weren't just idle complaints. They were detailed, scholarly critiques of the existing system and bold proposals for a new one. He devoured books on history and political theory, studying the rise and fall of ancient republics. He filled notebooks with his analysis, most famously a short essay titled Vices of the Political System of the United States. In this powerful document, Madison systematically dismantled the Articles of Confederation. He pointed out flaw after flaw. The federal government's inability to enforce its own laws, the encroachment of states on federal authority, the lack of a uniform currency, and the injustices that arose from unchecked state legislatures. He argued that the very structure of the government encouraged division and instability. It was a government in name only, lacking the energy and vigor necessary to govern a growing nation. But Madison wasn't just a critic, he was a builder. His writings from this period reveal a clear and compelling vision. He proposed a radically different model. A national government that was not merely a league of states, but one that could act directly on the people. This government would have the power to tax, to regulate interstate commerce, and to create a national judiciary. It would have separate executive, legislative, and judicial branches, each with checks on the other's power. This was a blueprint for a true republic, one that was both powerful and accountable. At the heart of Madison's vision was a profound and challenging question. How do you create a government strong enough to be effective, without it becoming so strong that it threatens the very liberty it's meant to protect? This was the central paradox he wrestled with. He understood that pure, direct democracy could be just as tyrannical as a king. A majority, if unchecked, could easily trample the rights of a minority. His solution was ingenious. He advocated for a large, extended republic. In a small republic, it was easy for a single faction or special interest group to gain control and oppress others. But in a large republic, with many different interests, regions, and opinions, it would be much harder for any single group to form a tyrannical majority. As he would later argue in the Federalist Papers, ambition must be made to counteract ambition. The sheer size and diversity of the nation would act as a natural brake on the abuse of power. This concept of balancing liberty and authority was Madison's great contribution to political thought. He wasn't arguing for an all-powerful central government, nor was he arguing for the neuronarchy of the Articles. He was searching for a middle ground, a stable equilibrium. He believed that a well-constructed government could be a guardian of liberty, not its enemy. It could provide the stability and order necessary for individual freedom to flourish. Through his extensive correspondence with figures like Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, and Alexander Hamilton, Madison's ideas began to circulate among the nation's elite. His deep knowledge of history, his logical clarity, and the force of his arguments were impossible to ignore. People started to take notice of the quiet, studious man from Virginia. He wasn't a charismatic orator like Patrick Henry or a dashing military hero like Washington, but he was earning a different kind of reputation, that of the nation's foremost political thinker. His letters and essays were passed from hand to hand, discussed in taverns and statehouses. They laid the intellectual groundwork for what was to come. When the call for a convention to revise the Articles of Confederation finally came, Madison was more prepared than anyone. He had already diagnosed the problems and, more importantly, had spent years developing a cure. His growing reputation was built on substance, not style. He was known for his meticulous preparation, his intellectual honesty, and his unwavering commitment to the Republican experiment. He believed that government was a science, one that required careful study and deliberate design. This belief set him apart and made him the indispensable man in the debates that would soon shape the future of the nation. Madison's vision was not just an academic exercise. It was a practical plan to save the Republic from itself. He saw the potential for a great nation, but he also saw the deep-seated flaws that threatened to tear it apart. His work in the years leading up to 1787 was a desperate, brilliant effort to chart a new course, to build a government that was both strong and free. Join us next time as we follow Madison to the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, where his vision for a strong republic will face its ultimate test, and where he will earn the title we know him by today, the Father of the Constitution. Thanks for watching, and if you're enjoying this journey through American history, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more. We'll see you in the next chapter. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our series. Today, we're journeying down the road to Philadelphia, a pivotal path in American history that led to the creation of the Constitution. The year is 1787, and the young United States is teetering on the edge of chaos. The Articles of Confederation, the nation's first governing document, have proven disastrously weak. The economy is in shambles. States are bickering like rival kingdoms, and a recent farmers' uprising in Massachusetts, known as Shays' Rebellion, has sent a shockwave of fear through the ruling class. It was clear to many that something had to change, and fast. The nation was like a ship without a rudder, tossed about by stormy seas. The central government had no power to tax, no way to enforce its laws, and no ability to regulate commerce between the states. Each state acted like its own little country, printing its own money and imposing tariffs on goods from its neighbors. Imagine trying to run a business where you have to exchange currency just to cross from Pennsylvania into New Jersey. It was an unworkable mess. The dream of a unified republic was fading, replaced by the grim reality of 13 squabbling, semi-independent entities. Amidst this growing crisis, a chorus of voices began calling for a solution. Figures like Alexander Hamilton and James Madison were among the loudest. They argued that simply tweaking the articles wouldn't be enough. A complete overhaul was necessary. They began advocating for a grand convention, a meeting of delegates from all the states, to discuss and propose fundamental changes to the structure of the government. This was a radical idea. It meant questioning the very foundation of the nation that had been established just a few years earlier. The initial call for a convention, the Annapolis Convention of 1786, was a bit of a flop. Only 5 states sent delegates. It seemed like the movement might die before it even began. But the attendees, led by the ever-persistent Hamilton, made a brilliant strategic move. Instead of giving up, they drafted a report calling for another, more comprehensive convention to be held the following year in Philadelphia. Their stated goal was to revise the Articles of Confederation to make them adequate to the exigencies of the Union. The urgency created by Shays' Rebellion helped convince the reluctant states that this was a meeting they could unafford to miss. As the states began appointing their delegates for the Philadelphia Convention, one man was preparing more intensely than anyone else. That man was James Madison of Virginia. Madison wasn't just planning to show up and debate. He was preparing to lead. He believed this was a once-in-a-generation opportunity to create a stable, effective, and lasting republic, and he was determined not to let it slip away. He understood that success would depend not on fiery speeches, but on meticulous preparation and a clear, well-reasoned plan. Long before the first gavel fell in Philadelphia, Madison transformed his library at Montpelier into a laboratory of political science. He wrote to his friend, Thomas Jefferson, who was serving as an ambassador in Paris, asking him to send crates of books, hundreds of them. He devoured works on history, law, and philosophy. He studied the rise and fall of every republic known to history, from ancient Greece and Rome to the contemporary Swiss cantons and Dutch confederacies. He wanted to understand why they succeeded and, more importantly, why they failed. Madison was like a political detective, searching for clues in the annals of history. What caused factions to tear ancient Athens apart? How did the Roman Republic devolve into an empire? He filled notebooks with his findings, creating a detailed analysis of the weaknesses inherent in past governments. He wasn't just accumulating facts. He was looking for patterns, for universal principles of governance. He concluded that the fatal flaw in most republics was the inability to control the destructive power of factions, what we might call special interest groups or political parties today. From this deep historical study, Madison began to draft his own theories of government. He wasn't just critiquing the past. He was designing the future. Weeks before leaving for Philadelphia, he penned a short but powerful essay titled Vices of the Political System of the United States. He systematically listed the failures of the Articles of Confederation. He pointed out the failure of states to comply with national requests, their encroachment on federal authority, their violations of treaties, and their trespasses on each other's rights. But Madison went further. He didn't just diagnose the problem. He proposed a cure. He began to sketch out the framework for a completely new government, a government with a strong national authority, divided into three distinct branches: a legislature, an executive, and a judiciary. He envisioned a two-house legislature, with representation in one house based on population, giving more power to the larger states like his own Virginia. This was a revolutionary departure from the one-state, one-vote system of the Articles. This detailed blueprint, which would come to be known as the Virginia Plan, was the result of Madison's tireless preparation. It was his intellectual ammunition for the debates to come. When he finally set out on the road to Philadelphia in the spring of 1787, he was the first out-of-state delegate to arrive. He was early, he was prepared, and he carried with him the ideas that would form the very bedrock of the United States Constitution. He wasn't just a delegate. He was the convention's chief architect, ready to build a new nation from the ground up. The road had been long and uncertain, but James Madison had arrived, and the future of America was about to be written. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the critical moments leading up to the Constitutional Convention. Madison's incredible foresight and preparation really set the stage for everything that followed. If you found this interesting, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter in our story. We love hearing from you, so drop a comment below with your thoughts. Until next time, stay curious. Hey everyone, and welcome back to our series on the birth of the United States Constitution. Today, we're diving into a pivotal moment, a turning point that would shape the very fabric of American government. Grab your coffee, get comfortable, and let's talk about Chapter 7. The Virginia Plan. Picture this. It's May 1787. The Articles of Confederation are failing, and the young nation is teetering on the brink of collapse. Delegates from across the states gather in Philadelphia, in the same room where the Declaration of Independence was signed, for what they thought was a meeting to simply amend the Articles. But one man, a quiet, brilliant, and meticulously prepared delegate from Virginia, had something much more radical in mind. That man was James Madison. Even before the Constitutional Convention officially began, Madison was hard at work. He had spent months, even years, studying governments both ancient and modern, dissecting their strengths and weaknesses. He arrived in Philadelphia early, armed with a comprehensive blueprint for a completely new form of government. This wasn't a tweak or a minor adjustment. It was a revolution on paper. When the convention was gavelled into session, it was Virginia's governor, Edmund Randolph, who stood to present Madison's audacious proposal. But make no mistake, the ideas, the structure, the very soul of the plan came from Madison. It became known as the Virginia Plan, or sometimes the Large State Plan, and it immediately sent shockwaves through the Assembly Hall. So, what was so revolutionary about it? At its core, the Virginia Plan proposed a powerful, robust national government. This was a stark departure from the weak, decentralized system under the Articles of Confederation, where states held nearly all the power. Madison envisioned a government that could act decisively for the good of the entire nation, not just be at the mercy of 13 squabbling states. The plan's most famous feature was its structure. A government divided into 3 distinct branches. First, a bicameral legislature. That means a 2-house Congress with the power to make laws for the entire country. The first house, the lower house, would be elected directly by the people. Second, the upper house would be chosen by the members of the first house from a pool of candidates nominated by the state legislatures. Now, here's the part that really stirred the pot. Representation in both houses would be based on population. The more people a state had, the more representatives it would get. You can immediately see why this appealed to large states like Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts. For them, it was simple fairness. More people should mean more voice. But for smaller states like Delaware, New Jersey, and Rhode Island, this was terrifying. They feared being completely overshadowed and outvoted by their larger neighbors. Their unique interests, they argued, would be swallowed whole. Next, the Virginia Plan called for a strong national executive, a president, essentially chosen by the legislature. This executive would have the power to enforce the laws passed by Congress. This was a massive step up from the Articles, which had no independent executive at all. The idea of a single, powerful figure at the head of the government made some delegates nervous, reminding them of the king they had just fought a war to escape. And finally, the third branch, a national judiciary, including a Supreme Court. This branch would have the authority to interpret the laws and settle disputes between states. Madison's plan even included a fascinating check on power, a council of revision, made up of the executive and some of the national judges. This council could veto laws passed by the legislature, ensuring that no single branch became too powerful. It was a brilliant, early version of the checks and balances system we know today. The introduction of the Virginia Plan ignited the first major debate of the convention. It immediately framed the central conflict. How to balance the power of a national government with the rights of the individual states. The delegates were no longer talking about fixing the Articles. They were now debating the fundamental nature of the American Republic. These small states quickly rallied in opposition. They saw Madison's plan as a power grab by the large states. William Paterson of New Jersey would soon present a counter-proposal, the New Jersey Plan, which we'll cover in our next chapter. But for weeks, the delegates in Philadelphia wrestled with the ideas Madison had laid out. They debated every detail. How should representatives be elected? How long should their terms be? How much power should the national government have over the states? Could the national government veto state laws? This last point was particularly controversial. Madison's original plan gave Congress the power to negate any state law it deemed unconstitutional, a power that many felt went way too far. The debate was intense, passionate, and at times, deeply personal. Men like Alexander Hamilton argued for an even stronger central government, while others fought fiercely to preserve state sovereignty. It was in the crucible of this debate that the real work of compromise began. The delegates realized that if they were to create a more perfect union, neither the large states nor the small states could get everything they wanted. Madison's Virginia Plan, though it wasn't adopted in its entirety, was the essential catalyst for the Constitution. It set the agenda, defined key questions, and provided the basic framework that the delegates would spend the entire summer modifying, debating, and refining. The bicameral legislature, the 3 branches of government, the idea of a government deriving its power from the people. All of these core principles of the U.S. Constitution have their roots in the bold proposal that James Madison brought to Philadelphia. It was a testament to his foresight and preparation. By presenting a comprehensive plan right at the outset, Madison shifted the entire conversation. He forced his fellow delegates to think bigger, to imagine a new kind of nation. The compromises that followed, like the Great Compromise, which established our current Congress with a House based on population and a Senate with equal representation for each state, were direct responses to the tensions created by the Virginia Plan. So, while James Madison is often called the father of the Constitution, it's crucial to remember that he wasn't its sole author. The final document was the product of immense debate and hard-won compromise, but it was his Virginia Plan that served as the starting point, the indispensable foundation upon which the entire structure was built. It was the bold first draft of American democracy. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into the Virginia Plan. It's a fascinating story of intellect, ambition, and the art of the possible. If you enjoyed this video and learned something new, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next chapter on the New Jersey Plan. Drop a comment below with your thoughts or questions. We love hearing from you. Until next time, stay curious. Welcome back to our journey through the founding of America. Last time, we saw the delegates gather in Philadelphia, ready to fix a broken system. But as the doors to the State House closed, the real battle was just beginning. This is Chapter 8. The Great Debate. Imagine the sweltering heat of a Philadelphia summer in 1787. Inside a single room, the brightest minds of a new nation are locked in a battle of wills. The Articles of Confederation had failed, and everyone agreed a stronger central government was needed. But what would it look like? How could it be powerful enough to unite them, yet not so powerful that it crushed the very liberties they had fought for? This question exploded into a furious conflict, not between North and South, but between the large states and the small states. On one side, you had states like Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts, with their large populations. They believed that representation in the new government should be based on the number of people. More people, more power. It seemed logical, right? The government should represent the people, after all. Leading this charge was a quiet, bookish Virginian who had done his homework. James Madison. Before the convention even began, Madison had spent months studying governments throughout history. He arrived with a blueprint in hand, the Virginia Plan. It called for a strong national government, with 2 houses in the legislature, and in both houses, a state's number of representatives would be determined by its population. To Madison and his allies, this was the only fair and democratic way forward. It was a government of the people, not a league of states. But the small states were terrified. Delaware, New Jersey, Maryland. They looked at Madison's plan and saw their own extinction. They feared they would be completely dominated by the larger states. Their voices, their interests, their very identities would be swallowed whole. A delegate from Delaware, Gunning Bedford, Jr., put it bluntly. He warned the large states. "I do not, gentlemen, trust you." He declared that the small states would find a foreign ally who will take them by the hand and do them justice. Think about that for a moment. The threat of tearing the Union apart and seeking help from European powers was openly discussed on the convention floor. That's how high the stakes were. The small states fired back with their own proposal, the New Jersey Plan, presented by William Patterson. This plan was much more modest. It sought to amend the Articles of Confederation, not replace them. It proposed a single-house legislature where every state, regardless of its size, had one vote. Equality of states, not of population. To them, this was the only way to protect their sovereignty and prevent a tyranny of the majority. The nation was a confederation of individual states, they argued, and those states must be treated as equals. For weeks, the debate raged. The air in the convention hall grew thick with tension and suspicion. Tempers flared. Voices were raised. Delegates accused each other of ambition, of seeking to create a new monarchy, of plotting to destroy the Union. Benjamin Franklin, the wise old man of the convention, 81 years old and in poor health, pleaded for calm. He even suggested they begin each day with a prayer, hoping for divine guidance to see them through the deadlock. The convention was teetering on the brink of collapse. Delegates threatened to walk out. It seemed the great American experiment might end before it even truly began, shattered by the simple, seemingly unsolvable question of representation. Madison's brilliant Virginia Plan, which formed the basis for so much of our government, was about to be rejected. The dream of a United States was fading. The delegates had reached an impasse, a moment of crisis, where the future of a continent hung in the balance. How could they possibly bridge this gap? How could they reconcile two fundamentally different visions for the nation? They couldn't go back to the failed articles, but they couldn't agree on the path forward. The great debate had pushed them to the edge of a cliff. The convention was broken, and Tosaveta, they would need a miracolo. At least, a great compromise. But that's a story for our next chapter. We'll see how a small committee, working behind the scenes, forged a solution that saved the Constitution and created the unique American system of government we have today. Thanks for watching. If you're finding this journey into American history as fascinating as I am, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss what happens next. See you in the next chapter. Hello history lovers, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most pivotal moments in American history. The final 10 days of the Constitutional Convention. Imagine a sweltering Philadelphia summer in 1787. 4 months. The nation's greatest minds have been locked in heated debate, trying to forge a new government from scratch. The Articles of Confederation had failed, the country was fragile, and everything was on the line. How did they pull it off? How did they bridge the divides that threatened to tear the young nation apart before it even truly began? Well, it all came down to a series of brilliant, last-minute compromises that would shape America forever. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's travel back to Independence Hall to witness the birth of the U.S. Constitution. So, what was the biggest hurdle? It was the classic battle. Big states versus small states. The large, populous states, like Virginia, wanted representation in the new Congress to be based on population. Makes sense, right? More people, more power. But the smallest states, like Delaware and New Jersey, were terrified. They feared their voices would be completely drowned out, that they'd be steamrolled by their larger neighbors. They argued for equal representation, with each state getting the same number of votes, regardless of size. This disagreement was so intense, it nearly torpedoed the entire convention. The delegates were at a total impasse, and the future of the United States hung in the balance. Then came the breakthrough, a moment of political genius known as the Great Compromise, or the Connecticut Compromise. It was a brilliant solution that addressed the fears of both sides. The proposal was to create a bicameral legislature or Congress with 2 separate houses. In the first house, the House of Representatives, representation would be based on population. This satisfied the big states. Every 30,000 citizens would get 1 representative, giving states with larger populations more say in matters directly affecting the people. But in the second house, the Senate, every state would get 2 senators, regardless of its size. This was the crucial olive branch to the small states, guaranteeing them an equal footing in at least 1 chamber of government. No law could pass without the approval of both houses, meaning both the will of the people and the rights of the states had to be respected. It was a masterful balancing act, a compromise that saved the convention and created the legislative system we still have today. But the Great Compromise wasn't the only major deal that had to be struck. The issue of slavery cast a long, dark shadow over the proceedings. The southern states, where the economy was heavily reliant on enslaved labor, wanted to count their entire enslaved population for the purpose of representation in the House. This would have given them significantly more political power. The northern states, many of which were moving towards abolition, were horrified by this idea. They argued that if enslaved people were to be treated as property, they shouldn't be counted for representation at all. This led to another painful and deeply flawed agreement, the 3/5 Compromise. Under this deal, for the purposes of both representation and taxation, an enslaved person would be counted as 3/5 of a free person. It was a grim, dehumanizing calculation made purely for political expediency. A deal with the devil that kicked the can of slavery down the road, embedding it into the very foundation of the new government. It is a stark reminder that the birth of the nation was far from perfect and came at a terrible human cost. Now, you might be wondering, how do we know so much about these intense, behind-the-scenes debates? The convention was held in strict secrecy. The windows were nailed shut. Guards were posted at the doors, and delegates were sworn to silence. The answer lies with one man. James Madison. While others debated, Madison listened. Every single day, he sat near the front and meticulously, painstakingly, took notes. He wrote down not just the motions and votes, but the speeches, the arguments, the passions, and the personalities of the men in the room. He was so dedicated that even when he was ill, he had a fellow delegate take notes for him. He understood the profound historical importance of what was happening and took it upon himself to create a record for posterity. After the convention ended each day, he would return to his lodgings and, by candlelight, flesh out his shorthand notes, ensuring every detail was captured. These notes, which weren't published until after his death decades later, are an absolute treasure. They are, by far, the most complete and reliable account we have of the Constitutional Convention. Without James Madison's tireless work, the fiery speeches of Alexander Hamilton, the wise counsel of Benjamin Franklin, and the intricate details of the compromises would be lost to history. His notes allow us to be flies in the wall in Independence Hall, to understand the logic, the fears, and the hopes that guided the framers. It's because of Madison, often called the father of the Constitution, that we have such a rich and nuanced understanding of how our government was designed. His dedication to creating this record was as crucial to the future of the Republic as any speech he gave. After nearly 4 grueling months of debate, compromise, and revision, the final draft of the Constitution was ready. On September 17, 1787, the delegates gathered one last time. The document was read aloud, a blueprint for a new form of government, unlike any the world had ever seen. The atmosphere was a mix of exhaustion, relief, and anxiety. Not everyone was happy. Some delegates had already left in protest, and of those remaining, 3 refused to sign, believing the new government was too powerful and lacked a Bill of Rights. It was a tense moment. The 81-year-old Benjamin Franklin, too frail to stand, had a fellow delegate read a speech he had prepared. He admitted the Constitution wasn't perfect, but he urged his colleagues to doubt a little of his own infallibility and sign the document for the good of the nation. His words were powerful. One by one, 39 of the 55 delegates who had attended the convention walked to the front of the room and signed their names to the document. As the last members were signing, Franklin famously looked at the sun carved into the back of George Washington's chair. He remarked that artists often found it difficult to distinguish a rising sun from a setting sun in their paintings. "I have," he said, often and often in the course of the session, looked at that behind the president without being able to tell whether it was rising or setting. But now at length I have the happiness to know that it is a rising and not a setting sun. With those signatures, the convention concluded, but the fight was far from over. The Constitution now had to be sent to the states for ratification, where a whole new battle would begin. And there you have it, the dramatic final act of the Constitutional Convention. From the brilliant Great Compromise that balanced the power of large and small states, to the deeply troubling 3/5 Compromise, to the quiet, dedicated work of James Madison, preserving the debates for all time. It all culminated on that historic day, September 17, 1787, with the signing of a document that, for all its flaws, created a framework for a new nation and a new experiment in self-government. It's a story of intellect, argument, and imperfect but necessary compromise. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you found this interesting and want to learn more about the epic story of American history, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next video. We've got so much more to explore together. Until next time, stay curious. Welcome back to our series on the life and legacy of James Madison. Today, we're diving into one of the most critical battles of his career, the fight for the new Constitution. After the grueling Constitutional Convention of 1787, the dream of a new American government was far from secure. In fact, it was in grave danger. Imagine this. You've just spent months hammering out a revolutionary new plan for a nation, a document you believe will secure liberty and create a more perfect union. But the moment it's made public, a storm of opposition erupts. This was the reality Madison faced. Across the states, powerful voices rose up against the proposed Constitution. These opponents, who came to be known as the Anti-Federalists, were deeply suspicious of a strong central government. They feared it would swallow up state power and trample on individual liberties, much like the British monarchy they had just fought to escape. Their arguments were persuasive. They painted a picture of a distant, tyrannical federal government, disconnected from the people. They warned of standing armies, oppressive taxes, and an aristocracy of the powerful. For many ordinary Americans, these fears were very real. The revolution was fresh in their minds, and the idea of handing so much power to a new national government felt like a betrayal of the very principles they had fought for. The ratification of the Constitution was hanging by a thread, and the future of the United States was uncertain. Madison knew that simple hope wouldn't be enough. He had to enter the arena of public opinion and fight for the future he envisioned. Faced with this fierce opposition, James Madison knew he couldn't stand by and watch his life's work crumble. The public debate was raging, and the anti-Federalists were making a powerful case. To counter their arguments, Madison joined forces with two other brilliant minds, Alexander Hamilton and John J. Hamilton. The fiery and ambitious New Yorker was a fellow delegate from the convention and a passionate advocate for a strong national government. John J., a seasoned diplomat and jurist, brought a wealth of experience and a respected reputation to the team. Together, this trio embarked on an extraordinary intellectual project. Under the shared pseudonym Publius, they began writing a series of essays to be published in New York newspapers. Their goal was clear: to systematically explain and defend every aspect of the proposed Constitution, to persuade the skeptical public, and most importantly, to convince the delegates of the ratifying conventions. This monumental effort would become what we now know as the Federalist Papers. Think about the sheer scale of this undertaking. Between October 1787 and August 1788, they churned out an incredible 85 essays. It was a relentless pace, a war of words fought in the public square. Hamilton wrote the majority, focusing on the executive and judicial branches, as well as military and taxation. Jay, who fell ill early on, contributed 5 essays on foreign relations, but it was Madison who provided some of the most profound and enduring arguments of the entire collection. He drew on his deep knowledge of history and political philosophy to dissect the very nature of Republican government. It wasn't just a political campaign, it was a masterclass in political theory, delivered on a deadline, with the fate of a nation hanging in the balance. Within this incredible body of work, a few of Madison's essays stand out as truly legendary. None more so than Federalists Know. 10 and Federalists Know. 51. These weren't just responses to the critics. They were groundbreaking explorations of political science that are still studied and debated today. Let's start with Federalists Know. 10, arguably the most famous of all the essays. Here, Madison tackles a problem that had plagued republics throughout history. The danger of factions. A faction, as he defined it, was a group of citizens, whether a minority or a majority, united by a common passion or interest that was opposed to the rights of other citizens, or the good of the whole community. The anti-federalists feared that in a large republic, a powerful majority faction could easily crush the rights of the minority. Madison's genius was to turn this argument on its head. He agreed that factions were dangerous, but he argued that they were an unavoidable part of human nature. As long as people have different opinions, different amounts of wealth, and different interests, they will form factions. The solution, he wrote, was not to eliminate factions, which would mean destroying liberty, but to control their effects. And how do you do that? Surprisingly, Madison argued that a large, extended republic was the best way. In a small republic, it's easier for a single faction to gain a majority and oppress everyone else. But in a large republic, with a multitude of different interests, parties, and sects, it becomes much harder for any one faction to dominate. The sheer diversity of the nation becomes its greatest protection. It's a brilliant and counterintuitive argument. Size and diversities are not weaknesses, but strengths that preserve liberty. Then we have Federalist Know. 51, where Madison addresses another major concern: how to prevent the government itself from becoming tyrannical. The anti-federalists worried that concentrating power in a national government would lead to abuse. Madison's answer is the principle of checks and balances. This is where we get the famous line, "Ambition must be made to counteract ambition." He explained how the Constitution's structure was designed to do just that. Power was divided not only between the federal government and the states, a system we call federalism, also among the 3 branches of the federal government: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. Each branch would be given the power and the constitutional means to resist encroachments from the others. The president can veto laws from Congress. Congress can impeach the president, and the courts can declare laws unconstitutional. As Madison so eloquently put it, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. But people aren't angels. By creating this system of separated powers and mutual checks, the Constitution uses human nature itself, our ambition and self-interest as a tool to protect liberty. It was a design for a government that could effectively govern, but one that was also held in check by its own internal structure. These essays were not just debating points. They were a blueprint for a new kind of government, one that could endure because it was built on a realistic understanding of human nature and power. The impact of the Federalist Papers was monumental. While it's hard to measure their exact influence on the votes of every delegate, there's no question that they fundamentally shaped the debate. They provided the Federalists with a coherent, intellectually powerful set of arguments that they could use in the state ratifying conventions. In New York, where the opposition was particularly strong, Hamilton and Madison's essays were crucial in slowly turning the tide. More than just a tool for ratification, the Federalist Papers immediately became the single most important commentary on the Constitution. They gave future generations, including judges, lawyers, and citizens, a window into the minds of the framers. When the Supreme Court tries to understand the original intent behind a clause in the Constitution, they frequently turn to the Federalist Papers. Madison's essays, in particular, established him as a premier political theorist. His deep dive into the mechanics of a compound republic, the dangers of faction, and the necessity of checks and balances became the bedrock of American political thought. In the end, the Constitution was ratified. The battle was won, state by state, often by narrow margins. Madison's tireless defense was indispensable. He didn't just help design the ship of state. He took to the press and the convention floors to calm the stormy seas and guide it safely into harbor. His work during this period cemented his reputation, not just as the father of the Constitution, but also as its most eloquent and effective defender. The ideas he championed in those frantic months have echoed through the centuries, shaping not only the United States, but also constitutional democracies around the world. Thank you so much for joining us for this chapter in the life of James Madison. His intellectual courage during the ratification debate secured the future of the nation. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next chapter. We love hearing from you, so drop your thoughts and questions in the comments below. We'll see you next time. Hello and welcome back to our series on the foundations of American governance. Today, we're diving into the final, and perhaps most enduring, chapter of our story: the legacy of the Federalist Papers. These 85 essays were more than just a marketing campaign for a new constitution. They became a timeless blueprint for self-government, a philosophical deep dive into the nature of power, liberty, and human behavior. Their influence wasn't confined to the 18th century. It echoes through the halls of justice and parliamentary chambers across the globe even today. So, what makes these essays so powerful? It's their profound understanding of the challenges inherent in a free society. The authors, Hamilton, Madison, and Jay, weren't naive idealists. They were stone-cold realists. They knew that people, even with the best intentions, could be driven by passion, self-interest, and factionalism. Their central challenge was designing a government that could control the governed, but just as importantly, a government that could control itself. This delicate balance is the secret sauce of the Federalist Papers, and it's why we're still talking about them over 2 centuries later. Let's focus on 2 of the absolute titans of political theory: Federalist No. 10 and Federalist No. 51, both penned by the brilliant James Madison. In Federalist No. 10, Madison tackles the mischiefs of faction. What's a faction? Think of it as any group of citizens, whether a majority or a minority, united by a common interest or passion that is adverse to the rights of other citizens, or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community. In modern terms, we might call them special interest groups, political parties, or ideological movements. Madison argues that factions are sewn into the very nature of man. As long as people have different opinions, different amounts of wealth, and different kinds of property, they will form alliances. You can eliminate the causes of faction without destroying liberty itself, which Madison calls a remedy worse than the disease. So, if you can't get rid of factions, what do? You control their effects. And this is where the genius of the American Republic comes in. Madison's solution was not a small, direct democracy where a passionate majority could easily steamroll the minority. Instead, he advocated for a large, representative republic. In a large republic, you have a greater variety of interests and parties. This diversity makes it much harder for any single faction to become a tyrannical majority. It's a brilliant concept. Use ambition to counteract ambition. The sheer size and diversity of the United States would act as a natural check on the power of any one group. A wicked project, he argued, is less likely to pervade the whole body of the Union than a particular state or county. Its pluralism as a defense mechanism for liberty. Now, let's turn to Federalists. No. 51, which contains one of the most famous lines in all of political philosophy. This essay builds on the ideas of No. 10 and explains how the structure of the proposed government will protect liberty. Madison asks, what is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? He famously writes, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. But, of course, men are not angels, and they are the ones who will be administering the government. So, how do you empower a government to rule, but prevent it from becoming oppressive? The answer is a system of separation of powers and checks and balances. Power, Madison argued, must be divided. The Constitution does this by creating 3 distinct branches: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. Each branch is given its own specific powers and its own will, but it doesn't stop there. To prevent one branch from accumulating too much power, each is given the constitutional means and personal motives to resist encroachments of the others. Think about it. The president can veto laws passed by Congress. Congress can impeach the president. The courts can declare laws unconstitutional. Ambition must be made to counteract ambition. This is the core principle of Federalist. 51. The structure of the government itself provides an internal check on the thirst for power. It's a system designed not for angels, but for fallible human beings. It ingeniously channels self-interest and ambition into a mechanism that protects the whole system. This double security, where power is first divided between the federal and state governments, and then subdivided among distinct branches at the federal level, creates a powerful safeguard for the rights of the people. The legacy of these ideas is truly monumental. Within the United States, the Federalist Papers are more than just historical documents. They are a living source of constitutional interpretation. The Supreme Court has cited them hundreds of times in its decisions, using them as a guide to understand the original intent of the framers. When justices debate the scope of federal power, the meaning of a particular clause, or the balance between the branches, they inevitably return to the arguments laid out by Hamilton, Madison, and Jay. The papers provide the why behind the what of the Constitution, but the influence of the Federalist Papers extends far beyond America's borders. As new nations emerged and old ones sought to reform their governments, many looked to the American experiment as a model. The principles of separation of powers, checks and balances, federalism, and the protection of minority rights from majority tyranny, all championed in the Federalist, had been adopted in constitutions around the world, from Latin America in the 19th century to the newly independent nations of Africa and Asia in the 20th, and even to the post-Soviet states of Eastern Europe. Constitutional architects have borrowed heavily from Madison's playbook. They recognized the universal wisdom in creating a government that was strong enough to be effective, but structured in a way that prevented it from becoming a threat to the very liberty it was created to protect. The debates that took place in Philadelphia and in the pages of New York newspapers have had a global ripple effect, shaping the trajectory of democratic governance for centuries. These essays are a testament to the power of reason, foresight, and a healthy dose of skepticism about human nature. They remind us that liberty is not self-sustaining. It requires a carefully constructed, thoughtfully designed system of governance, system that anticipates our flaws and channels our ambitions toward the common good. Federalist, No. 10 and 51. in particular, are not just historical artifacts. They are masterclasses in political science and a timeless guide for any society that seeks to be both governed and free. They are the enduring intellectual legacy of the American founding, a gift not just to the United States, but to the world. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the Federalist Papers. I hope this series has given you a deeper appreciation for the thought and effort that went into the creation of the American Republic. If you found this video insightful, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our future content. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Today, we're diving into a pivotal moment in American history. A story of political pressure, intellectual evolution, and the birth of our most cherished freedoms. We're talking about the creation of the Bill of Rights and the unlikely champion who brought it to life. When the Constitution was first presented to the states for ratification in 1787, it was met with a storm of controversy. While many, known as the Federalists, celebrated it as a masterpiece of governance, a powerful opposition group, the Anti-Federalists, raised a deafening alarm. Their biggest fear: the new federal government was too powerful and lacked one crucial element, a specific list of rights protecting individual citizens from that power. Figures like Patrick Henry and George Mason argued fiercely that without a Bill of Rights, the freedoms won in the Revolution were at risk. They painted a grim picture of a future where a centralized government could trample on the liberties of the people. This wasn't just abstract political theory. It was a deeply felt anxiety shared by many Americans. They had just fought a war to escape the tyranny of a king, and they were not about to hand over their freedoms to a new, potentially oppressive government, even one of their own making. The demand grew louder and louder across the states. Give us our rights on paper. So, who was leading the charge for the Constitution? None other than James Madison, often called the father of the Constitution. You might think, then, that he would be the first person to support a Bill of Rights. But here's the twist in our story. Initially, Madison was deeply skeptical. He wasn't against the idea of rights, of course, but he had some very practical and philosophical objections. First, Madison believed the Constitution as written was already a Bill of Rights. He argued that the document created a government with limited, enumerated powers. In his view, the government could only do what the Constitution explicitly said it could do. So, why list things the government couldn't do if it wasn't given the power to do them in the first place? He worried that listing specific rights might be dangerous. What if you forgot one? Would that imply the government had the power to infringe on that unlisted right? He called this the problem of a parchment barrier, that a mere list on paper wouldn't be enough to stop a government determined to overstep its bounds. Furthermore, he looked at the state constitutions. Many of them had bills of rights, but these hadn't always been effective in preventing state governments from violating citizens' liberties. I felt a well-structured federal system with checks and balances was a far more reliable safeguard for freedom than a simple list. So, for a time, Madison stood firm with other Federalists, arguing that a Bill of Rights was unnecessary and potentially even harmful. But James Madison was a brilliant political thinker and, just as importantly, a pragmatist. He listened. He observed the political landscape. His correspondence with his dear friend and mentor, Thomas Jefferson, who was in Paris at the time, was particularly influential. Jefferson was a staunch advocate for a Bill of Rights. He wrote to Madison, arguing that a Bill of Rights is what the people are entitled to against every government on earth. Jefferson conceded that it might not be a perfect solution, but he believed that having those rights written down gave the judiciary a legal basis to protect them. This back and forth with Jefferson chipped away at Madison's skepticism. The real turning point, however, came during the ratification debates. The opposition was so fierce that the Constitution barely passed in key states like Virginia and New York. To secure ratification, Federalists in several states had to promise that they would consider adding amendments to protect individual rights as soon as the new government was formed. Madison saw the writing on the wall. The nation was dangerously divided. He realized that the fight over a Bill of Rights was threatening the very survival of the new republic he had worked so hard to create. He understood that to unite the country and give the new government legitimacy, he had to make good on that promise. It was a matter of honor, but also of political necessity. This led to Madison's remarkable transformation. He went from being the Bill of Rights' most articulate skeptic to its most dedicated champion. When he ran for a seat in the first Congress, he campaigned on a platform of proposing a Bill of Rights. He won his election, and upon arriving in Congress in 1789, he knew he had a promise to keep. Once in Congress, Madison faced a new set of challenges. Ironically, many of his fellow Federalists now saw the issue as settled. They had won ratification and were eager to move on to the practical business of setting up the government, creating a treasury, establishing a judiciary, and so on. They saw Madison's focus on amendments as a distraction. On the other side, some anti-federalists saw an opportunity to fundamentally weaken the federal government through amendments, something Madison absolutely wanted to avoid. So, Madison was caught in the middle, but he was persistent. He took it upon himself to lead the drafting process. He sifted through over 200 proposed amendments that had been suggested by the state ratifying conventions. He carefully curated them, filtering out the ones that would cripple the federal government and focusing on those that protected fundamental personal liberties. He drew inspiration from historic documents like the Virginia Declaration of Rights, which his friend George Mason had penned, and the English Bill of Rights of 1689. On June 8, 1789, Madison stood before the House of Representatives and proposed a series of amendments. He didn't want them tacked on at the end of the Constitution. He wanted to weave them directly into the original text. He thought this would better integrate them into the fabric of the law. However, his colleagues disagreed, preferring to add them as a separate list at the end, which is the format we know today. Madison initially proposed 19 amendments. The House debated, revised, and consolidated them, eventually passing 17. These were then sent to the Senate, which made its own changes and reduced the number to 12. The process was a masterclass in legislative negotiation and compromise, all guided by Madison's steady hand. He fought to protect the core principles, ensuring the amendments would be a shield for the people, not a sword to attack the new government. Finally, in September 1789, the 12 proposed amendments were sent to the states for ratification. Over the next 2 years, the states debated them one by one. By December 15, 1791, Virginia became the 11th state to ratify 10 of the 12 amendments, giving them the 3/4 majority needed to become part of the Constitution. And thus, the Bill of Rights was born. These first 10 amendments secure some of our most fundamental freedoms. The First Amendment protects freedom of speech, religion, the press, assembly, and petition. The second guarantees the right to bear arms. The fourth protects us from unreasonable searches and seizures. The fifth and sixth ensure rights for the accused, like due process and a speedy trial. The eighth prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. Together, they form the bedrock of American liberty. The story of the Bill of Rights is a powerful lesson in political evolution and the importance of compromise. It shows how a leader, James Madison, could change his mind in the face of compelling arguments and political reality. He transformed from a skeptic into a champion, not because he was weak, but because he was wise enough to see that unity and public trust were essential for the new nation's success. He took the passionate demands of the opposition and channeled them into a constructive act that strengthened the very Constitution he had fathered. The Bill of Rights stands as a monument to the idea that liberty and government are not enemies, but partners. It's a testament to the fact that our founding document is a living one, capable of being improved and perfected, and it's a tribute to James Madison, the reluctant champion who secured our liberties for generations to come. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through history. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you won't miss our next video. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our series on the life of James Madison. Today, we're re-diving into one of the most significant political partnerships in American history. The alliance between James Madison and Thomas Jefferson. This was more than just a political convenience. It was a deep friendship forged in the fires of revolution and built on a shared vision for the future of the United States. So, how did these two giants of American history become such close allies? It started with a shared intellectual curiosity and a profound belief in the principles of republicanism. Jefferson, the elder of the two, was already a renowned figure, the author of the Declaration of Independence Madison, the meticulous scholar and political theorist, was the architect of the Constitution. They first met in 1776, but their collaboration truly blossomed in the 1780s. They corresponded constantly, exchanging books, ideas, and political strategies. Jefferson, serving as the American minister to France, would send Madison crates of books on political philosophy, history, and law from Europe. In return, Madison kept Jefferson informed of the political developments back home, including the debates at the Constitutional Convention. What united them was a profound commitment to individual liberty, a belief in an agrarian republic of yeoman farmers, and a deep suspicion of centralized power. They feared that a powerful federal government, far removed from the people, could become a new form of tyranny, mirroring the British monarchy they had fought so hard to escape. They envisioned a nation where power remained as close to the people as possible, primarily at the state and local levels. This shared ideology would soon become the bedrock of a new political movement. The 1790s were a turbulent time. The new government, under President George Washington, was finding its footing, but deep divisions were emerging about the nation's direction. The main source of this conflict was the ambitious and brilliant Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton had a radically different vision for America. He imagined a bustling commercial and industrial nation, powered by a strong central government, a national bank, and close ties with Great Britain. His financial plan, which included the federal government assuming state debts and creating a Bank of the United States, was seen by Madison and Jefferson as a dangerous overreach of federal power. Madison, initially a key proponent of a stronger national government during the Constitutional Convention, was now deeply alarmed. He saw Hamilton's policies as favoring northern merchants, bankers, and speculators at the expense of southern planters and ordinary farmers. He believed Hamilton was trying to create a British-style system of patronage and financial aristocracy, which he felt was the very definition of corruption and a threat to Republican virtue. Jefferson, sharing these fears, famously called Hamilton's system a tissue of machinations against the liberty of the country. This ideological clash was not just a polite disagreement. It was a battle for the soul of the new republic. Madison, who had co-authored the Federalist Papers with Hamilton to argue for the Constitution's ratification, now found himself on the opposite side of a fierce political divide. He took to the floor of Congress, delivering powerful speeches arguing that Hamilton's plan for a national bank was unconstitutional. He argued from a strict constructionist viewpoint, insisting that the Constitution did not explicitly grant Congress the power to create a bank, and therefore it was forbidden. This was a pivotal moment, marking Madison's public break with the Federalists who had been his allies just a few years earlier. Out of this fierce opposition, a new political party began to coalesce. Initially, they called themselves Republicans, to emphasize their commitment to the principles of the Republic. History, however, would remember them as the Democratic Republic. This was America's first opposition party, and Madison and Jefferson were its undisputed leaders. They weren't just politicians. They were organizers. They used newspapers, like Philip Freenow's National Gazette, which Madison helped establish, to spread their message and counter the pro-Hamiltonian press. They built a network of supporters across the country, from the plantations of Virginia to the farms of Pennsylvania and the streets of New York. The founding of the Democratic-Republican Party was a watershed moment. It established the tradition of a loyal opposition in American politics, idea that one could oppose the government's policies without being disloyal to the nation itself. Madison and Jefferson argued that organized political opposition was not a sign of disunity or factionalism, but a vital mechanism for holding power accountable and protecting liberty. They were creating the very blueprint for the two-party system that, in many ways, defines American politics to this day. Their partnership was a perfect blend of talents. Jefferson was the inspirational visionary, the eloquent writer who could articulate the party's ideals in soaring, powerful prose. He was the philosopher king, the movement's ideological figurehead. Madison, on the other hand, was the master strategist, the legislative tactician, and the tireless organizer. He was the one on the ground in Congress, leading the debates, drafting the legislation, and building the coalitions necessary to challenge Hamilton and the Federalists. While Jefferson might write a letter outlining a grand principle, Madison would figure out how to turn that principle into a concrete political action. Together, They presented a formidable challenge to the Federalist agenda. They opposed Hamilton's economic system, argued for a foreign policy that favored revolutionary France over monarchical Britain, and championed the Bill of Rights as a crucial safeguard against government overreach. Their collaboration defined the major political debates of the decade and set the stage for the contentious election of 1800, which would see their party finally take power. The friendship between the quiet, analytical Madison and the charismatic visionary Jefferson was more than a personal bond. It was the engine that drove the creation of America's first political party and shaped the course of the nation for generations to come. Their partnership is a powerful testament to how shared ideals and complementary skills can change the course of history. Thank you so much for joining me for this chapter in the life of James Madison. His story is far from over, and the political battles of the 1790s were just getting started. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn what happens next, please be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next episode. We'll see you then. We'll see then. In 1794, James Madison's life changed forever when he married the vivacious widow, Dolly Payne Todd. This wasn't just a marriage. It was the beginning of one of America's most influential political partnerships. While Madison was the quiet intellectual, Dolly was the charismatic heart of their duo. Her charm was legendary. As they moved to Washington, her social gatherings became the epicenter of political life, skillfully bridging divides and fostering alliances with her warmth and grace. She wasn't just hosting parties. She was shaping the new nation's social and political fabric. When Madison became president, Dolly truly blossomed, defining the role of the First Lady. She became a national icon, admired for her style, intelligence, and unwavering patriotism. Dolly wasn't just the president's wife. She was his greatest partner and a true American heroine. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this glimpse into history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more stories. Start a video, hello history buffs, and welcome back to our deep dive into the lives of America's founding fathers. Today, we re-stepping into the White House with the man often called the father of the Constitution, James Madison, as he takes on his most challenging role yet, the fourth president of the United States. If you thought writing the Constitution was hard, just wait until you see what he had to deal with in office. On March 4th, 1809, a crowd gathered in Washington to witness the inauguration of James Madison. At 57, he was stepping out from behind the shadow of his friend and predecessor, Thomas Jefferson, to take the helm of a young and vulnerable nation. His inaugural address was filled with optimism, a call for unity, and a firm belief in the Republican principles he had worked so hard to establish. He spoke of peace, of neutral commerce, and of the strength of the American experiment. But even as he spoke those words of hope, the storm clouds of international conflict were gathering, darker and more menacing than ever before. From the moment he entered office, Madison's presidency was dominated by one overwhelming issue: the escalating tensions with Great Britain. The Napoleonic Wars were raging across Europe, and America was caught in the crossfire. The British Royal Navy, desperate for sailors, continued its humiliating practice of impressment, forcibly seizing American sailors from U.S. ships and forcing them into British service. It was an affront to American sovereignty that enraged the public. Imagine your country's flag being no protection on the high seas, your countrymen being kidnapped in broad daylight. On top of that, both Britain and France had issued decrees that severely restricted American trade. It was economic warfare, and the U.S. economy, heavily reliant on maritime commerce, was bleeding. Jefferson's Embargo Act, a well-intentioned but disastrous attempt to punish the European powers by cutting off all American trade, had backfired, crippling American merchants far more than its intended targets. Madison inherited this mess. He replaced the Embargo Act with the less restrictive Non-Intercourse Act, which only forbade trade with Britain and France. It sounded better, but in practice, it was just as ineffective. The European giants were too preoccupied with their own titanic struggle to pay much attention to America's commercial protests. But the trouble wasn't just on the open ocean. On the western frontier, tensions were boiling over. American settlers were pushing relentlessly westward into Native American territories, creating a volatile and violent environment. Many in the West believed, and with good reason, that the British were actively encouraging and arming Native American tribes to resist this expansion. Figures like the Shawnee leader Tecumseh and his brother, the Prophet, were working to unite the tribes into a powerful confederacy to halt the American advance. This frontier conflict was increasingly seen as a proxy war, another front in the growing unofficial conflict with Great Britain. The scent of war was in the air. From the salty spray of the Atlantic to the forests of the Ohio Valley, faced with these mounting crises, Madison's leadership was put to the ultimate test. He was a brilliant political philosopher, a master of debate, and a skilled legislator. But was he the strong, decisive executive the country needed in a time of crisis? Critics, both then and now, have pointed to his perceived He was a man who preferred careful deliberation and consensus building, but the rapidly escalating situation demanded swift and forceful action. His cabinet was filled with differing opinions, and the political landscape was fractured. A new, younger generation of congressmen, known as the War Hawks, was rising to prominence. Led by fiery personalities like Henry Clay of Kentucky and John C. Calhoun of South Carolina, the War Hawks were tired of what they saw as years of national humiliation. They weren't from the revolutionary generation that had fought for independence. They were the first generation to grow up as Americans, and they were filled with a fervent, aggressive nationalism. They saw war with Britain not just as a necessity to defend American rights, but as an opportunity to seize Canada, to decisively end the British threat on the frontier, and to finally and fully assert America's status as a truly independent and powerful nation. They saw Madison's cautious diplomacy as weakness and pushed relentlessly for a declaration of war. Madison found himself caught between a rock and a hard place. On one side, he had the War Hawks, clamoring for a fight and whipping up public sentiment. On the other, he had the Federalists, particularly in New England, who were vehemently opposed to war, fearing it would mean the complete destruction of their maritime economy. Madison, the great consensus builder, was leading a deeply divided nation. He tried diplomacy one last time, but when a final attempt at negotiation failed, the pressure became overwhelming. The crisis tested every fiber of Madison's political being. He had dedicated his life to building a republic that could avoid the follies of European monarchies, their endless wars, their high taxes, their standing armies. Now, he was being pushed to embrace all of those things. He had to weigh the principles he held so dear against the very real threats to the nation's survival and honor. The scholar president, the man of reason and intellect, was being forced to become a wartime commander-in-chief. In June of 1812, after laying out a list of grievances against the British interference with trade and inciting conflict on the frontier, Madison asked Congress for a declaration of war. It was one of the closest war votes in American history, a stark reflection of the country's deep divisions. The United States, a young, unprepared nation with a tiny army and a small navy, was officially at war with the most powerful empire on earth. Madison's presidency had entered its defining chapter. The father of the Constitution would now have to lead the nation through its second war of independence. The challenges he had faced in his first few years would pale in comparison to what lay ahead. The very survival of the republic he had helped to create was now at stake. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey into James Madison's turbulent presidency. What do you think? Was war avoidable? Or were the War Hawks right? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video and want to learn what happens next in the War of 8, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss our next episode. We'll see you next time. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our historical journey through the American story. Today, we're diving into Chapter 17, a conflict often called America's Second War for Independence, the War of 1812. Now, you might be thinking, wait, didn't we already win independence from Britain? And you'd be right, but the story, as always, is a bit more complicated. So, grab a seat and let us unravel why the United States found itself at war with the world's greatest naval power. Again, to understand the War of 1812, we need to rewind a bit. In the early 1800s, Europe was in chaos. Napoleon Bonaparte's France was locked in a titanic struggle with Great Britain. The United States, a young and neutral nation, was trying to trade with both sides. But being neutral was easier said than done. The British Royal Navy, desperate for sailors, began a practice known as impressment. They would stop American ships, board them, and forcibly conscript sailors into British service. They claimed these men were British deserters, but thousands of them were American citizens. Imagine your country's ships being boarded and your countrymen being kidnapped on the high seas. The outrage in America was immense. This wasn't just an economic issue. It was an assault on American sovereignty and personal liberty. On top of impressment, the British were also interfering with American trade. They blockaded French ports and seized any American ships they suspected were heading there. For a young nation trying to build its economy, this was devastating. But the grievances didn't stop at sea. On the western frontier, American settlers were pushing further into Native American lands. Many Native American tribes, trying to resist this expansion, found an ally in the British, who supplied them with weapons from their forts in Canada. From the American perspective, the British were not only bullying them on the ocean, but also stirring up trouble on their own frontier. This combination of economic frustration, national humiliation, and frontier tensions created a powerful pro-war sentiment, particularly from a group of young, ambitious politicians known as the War Hawks. Led by figures like Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun, they argued that war was the only way to defend American honor, secure the western frontier, and finally force Britain to respect the United States as a truly independent nation. They beat the drums of war, fueled by a powerful sense of national pride. The pressure mounted, and in June of 1812, President James Madison asked Congress to declare war. The vote was close, revealing a deeply divided nation. But the decision was made. The United States was officially at war with Great Britain. The war itself was a messy, sprawling affair fought on three main fronts: at sea, along the Canadian border, and in the American South. On the high seas, the tiny U.S. Navy, despite being massively outnumbered, scored some shocking early victories. Ships, like the USS Constitution, nicknamed Old Ironsides for the way British cannonballs seemed to bounce off its thick oak hull, became symbols of American grit. These naval duels were huge morale boosters, proving that the young nation could stand up to the legendary Royal Navy. However, the fight on land was a different story, especially the campaigns to invade Canada. The Americans thought it would be a mere matter of marching, but they were sorely mistaken. Poor planning, inexperienced militias, and capable British and Canadian commanders, often allied with Native American forces led by the brilliant Shawnee leader Tecumseh, led to a series of embarrassing American defeats. The dream of conquering Canada quickly faded. The tide of the war took a dramatic turn in 1814. Napoleon was defeated in Europe, which freed up thousands of veteran British troops to be sent to America. The British planned a three-pronged attack to bring the upstart nation to its knees. One of these campaigns struck directly at the heart of the country, Washington, D.C. in August 1814. British forces marched on the capital. The American defenses crumbled, and the government fled in panic. As British troops entered the city, they set fire to the public buildings, including the Capitol and the President's house. It was a moment of profound national humiliation, but amidst the chaos and smoke, one story of courage shines through that of First Lady Dolly Madison. As the British approached, President Madison was away with the army. Dolly refused to abandon the president's house until she had secured vital national treasures. Most famously, she directed the staff to save the iconic, full-length portrait of George Washington, a priceless symbol of the Republic. They had to break the frame to get the canvas out just in time. Her bravery ensured that a key piece of American heritage was not lost to the flames, making her a national hero. After burning Washington, the British moved on to their next target, the crucial port city of Baltimore. But Baltimore was ready. The city was fiercely defended by Fort McHenry. For 25 long hours, British warships bombarded the fort with rockets and cannonballs. A young American lawyer named Francis Scott Key was detained on a British ship, watching the bombardment through the night. As dawn broke on September 14th, he anxiously looked to see if the fort had surrendered. Through the smoke, he saw the massive American flag, the Star-Spangled Banner, still flying defiantly over the fort. The British attack had failed. Overwhelmed with emotion, Key began to write a poem on the back of a letter. That poem, The Defense of Fort McHenry, would later be set to music and become our national anthem. It is an incredible reminder that our anthem was born from a moment of desperate defense and resilient pride. While the battle for Baltimore raged, another critical front was opening in the South. Here, the American commander was a tough, fiery Tennessean named Andrew Jackson. He had already won a decisive victory against the Creek Nation, a British ally, earlier in the war. His next and greatest challenge came after the peace treaty had actually been signed. News traveled slowly in the 19th century, and in January 1815, a massive British force landed near New Orleans, intending to seize the city and control the Mississippi River. Andrew Jackson cobbled together a motley army of U.S. regulars, frontier militiamen from Tennessee, and Kentucky local Creole citizens, free African Americans, and even a group of Jean Lafitte's pirates. From behind their makeshift fortifications, Jackson's forces met the disciplined British advance. The result was one of the most lopsided victories in military history. The British suffered over 2,000 casualties, including their commanding general, while the Americans had fewer than 100. The Battle of New Orleans was technically fought after the war was over, but it had a massive psychological impact. It was a stunning American victory against the best of the British Army. It catapulted Andrew Jackson to national stardom and filled the American people with an overwhelming sense of pride and vindication. So, who actually won the War of 1812? Well, that's the million-dollar question. The peace treaty, the Treaty of Ghent, was signed in December 1814, before the Battle of New Orleans, and in many ways, it simply returned things to the way they were before the war. The borders didn't change. The British didn't formally renounce impressment, although the practice largely ended with the defeat of Napoleon. From a purely tactical standpoint, you could call it a draw or even a stalemate, but in the grand scheme of American history, the war was a pivotal moment. Despite the military blunders and the burning of the capital, the United States had once again faced the British Empire and survived. The victories at sea, the defense of Baltimore, and especially the stunning triumph at New Orleans created a powerful wave of nationalism and unity that swept across the country. The deep political divisions that had marked the war's beginning started to fade, replaced by a shared sense of American identity. The country had been tested by fire, and it had emerged stronger, more confident, and ready to turn its attention away from European conflicts and toward its own continental expansion. The War of 1812 may not have been a clear-cut victory on paper, but it solidified America's independence in the eyes of the world and, more importantly, in the hearts of its own people. Thank you so much for joining me for this look into the War of 1812. It's a complex and fascinating chapter in our history, filled with moments of both failure and incredible heroism. If you found this interesting, please hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next chapter. We love hearing from you, so leave a comment below with your thoughts or questions. Until next time, stay curious. Welcome back to our series on the life of James Madison. Today, we journey to Montpelier, the beautiful Virginia estate where Madison spent his final years, transitioning from the nation's highest office to the role of a revered elder statesman. Chapter 19. Retirement at Montpelier. After leaving the presidency in 1817, James Madison returned to his beloved home. But this was no quiet retirement in the modern sense. His mind remained as sharp as ever, and his days were filled with activity. He dedicated himself to organizing his voluminous papers, meticulously documenting the debates and decisions that had shaped the United States. These weren't just personal memoirs. They were a conscious effort to preserve the history he had lived and to provide a guide for future generations. He knew the fragility of the Republic and believed that understanding its origins was key to its survival. His correspondence was vast, engaging with scholars, politicians, and ordinary citizens on the pressing issues of the day. Montpelier became a hub of intellectual activity, a place where the past was carefully curated to inform the future. One of Madison's most significant post-presidency projects was a collaboration with his old friend and mentor, Thomas Jefferson. Together, they championed the founding of the University of Virginia. This wasn't just about building another college. It was a revolutionary experiment in education. They envisioned an academical village, free from religious dogma, where students could pursue a wide range of subjects based on reason and free inquiry. Madison succeeded Jefferson as the university's rector in 1826, and he poured his energy into shaping its curriculum and governance. He saw the university as a vital institution for nurturing the citizen leaders the Republic would need. For Madison, education was the bedrock of liberty, the essential tool for empowering people to govern themselves wisely. His dedication to the University of Virginia was a testament to his lifelong belief in the power of knowledge. As the years passed, new political storms gathered. The nation grappled with issues like states' rights and nullification. Where some argued that a state could nullify federal laws it deemed unconstitutional. This challenge struck at the very heart of the Union Madison had worked so hard to build. From his study at Montpelier, he took up his pen once more, not as a politician, but as the last surviving signer of the Constitution. He wrote powerful essays and letters, arguing passionately against the doctrine of nullification. He clarified what he and the other framers had intended, defending the Constitution's role as the supreme law of the land. He explained that the Union was not a mere compact of sovereign states that could be as easily dissolved, but a government of the people. His writings from this period are a masterclass in constitutional theory, offering a robust defense of a unified nation. He became the father of the Constitution all over again, defending his creation from those who sought to tear it apart. Life at Montpelier, however, was not without its deep contradictions. Like many of his contemporaries, Madison was a slaveholder. He owned over 100 enslaved people who worked the plantation, and this reality stands in stark and troubling contrast to his public words about liberty and justice. He expressed private anguish over the institution of slavery, calling it a moral and political evil. He supported various colonization schemes, which proposed sending freed slaves to Africa, a solution that was ultimately impractical and unjust. Yet, despite his private reservations, Madison never freed his own slaves during his lifetime or in his will. This is a difficult and undeniable part of his legacy. It reminds us that even the most brilliant and forward-thinking figures of the past can be trapped by the profound moral failures of their time. Understanding Madison requires us to confront this paradoxy, study his immense contributions to American democracy while acknowledging the profound injustice that sustained his world. As he entered his 80s, Madison's health began to fail, but his intellect remained luminous. Visitors to Montpelier were consistently amazed by his sharp memory and the clarity of his thoughts. He continued to read, write, and discuss the future of the nation he had helped to create. On June 28, 1836, at the age of 85, James Madison passed away peacefully at his breakfast table. He was the last of the Founding Fathers, a living link to the American Revolution. His passing marked the end of an era, but his legacy was far from over. His meticulous notes on the Constitutional Convention would be published posthumously, providing an unparalleled window into the minds of the framers. His defense of the Union would echo through the coming decades, most notably during the Civil War. James Madison's retirement at Montpelier was a period of profound reflection and enduring influence. It was here that he cemented his role as the great interpreter of the Constitution and a guardian of the Republic's founding principles. His later years were a final, powerful act of service, dedicated to ensuring that the American experiment in self-government would endure. He left behind not just a legacy of political achievement, but a wealth of wisdom that continues to guide and challenge us today. His life reminds us that the work of democracy is never truly finished. It requires constant vigilance, study, and a commitment to the ideals of liberty and union. Thank you so much for joining us for this chapter. If you found this exploration of Madison's final years insightful, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into history. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next episode. We love hearing from you, so please share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our journey through the life of James Madison. Today, we arrive at our final chapter, a reflection on the enduring legacy of a man whose quiet intellect shaped a nation more profoundly than any sword or scepter ever could. Imagine the year 1836. The United States is a bustling, expanding nation, grappling with new challenges and opportunities. In the quiet solitude of his Montpelier estate in Virginia, the last of the founding giants, James Madison, draws his final breath. He was 85 years old, a living link to the revolution, a man who had seen a mere idea of a self-governing republic blossom into a continental reality. His death marked the end of an era, but it was merely the beginning of his true legacy. Madison left the world not with a crown or a dynasty, but with something far more powerful: a blueprint for freedom. We know him today by a title he earned through decades of tireless work and brilliant thought: the Father of the Constitution. It's a title he was too humble to claim for himself, but one that history has rightfully bestowed upon him. Think about that for a moment. He didn't father a king or an heir. He fathered a system, a framework designed to protect liberty by balancing power. His most crucial contribution, the one that echoes through the halls of governance to this day, was his understanding of human nature. Madison wasn't a utopian dreamer. He knew that people, and therefore governments, could be ambitious, fallible, and prone to tyranny. His solution wasn't to wish for better leaders, but to build a structure that would channel ambition against ambition. The separation of powers into three distinct branches, legislative, executive, and judicial, was his master. He designed a system of checks and balances where each branch could restrain the others, preventing any single entity from accumulating absolute power. It is a concept so fundamental to our understanding of democracy that we often take it for granted. Yet it was a revolutionary idea at the time. This intricate design wasn't just about preventing tyranny, it was about creating a durable republic. The Virginia Plan, which Madison largely authored, set the agenda for the Constitutional Convention. It proposed a strong national government, but one that was still accountable to the people. He argued passionately for a bicameral legislature, for proportional representation, and for a system that could adapt and endure. He was the chief architect, the intellectual heavyweight, in a room full of giants. But his work didn't stop when the Constitution was signed. Alongside Alexander Hamilton and John Jay, Madison penned the Federalist Papers. These essays were more than just political propaganda to encourage ratification. They were a brilliant, detailed explanation of the Constitution's principles. Madison's contributions, particularly essays like Federalists, No. 10, and No. 51, are masterpieces of political philosophy. In them, he tackles the timeless problem of factions, what we might call special interest groups or partisan divisions today. He argued that a large, diverse republic was the best defense against the dangers of factionalism, as no single group could easily dominate the whole. It's an argument that remains incredibly relevant in our modern, often polarized world. Madison's influence didn't just stay within American borders. The system he helped create became a model for democracies around the globe. When new nations emerged from colonialism or autocracy in the 19th and 20th centuries, they looked to the U.S. Constitution as a guide. The principles of a written constitution, of separated powers, of a Bill of Rights protecting individual liberties, these Madisonian ideas have been adopted, adapted, and debated in countless countries, from Latin America to Eastern Europe to Asia. His vision for a government of laws, not of men, has become a cornerstone of modern global governance and the international human rights movement. As president, Madison faced the monumental task of leading the young nation through the War of 1812. It was a brutal test of the very republic he had designed. The nation was divided, the military was weak, and at one point, the British even burned the White House. Yet, the republic held. The constitutional framework proved resilient enough to withstand foreign invasion and deep internal dissent. For Madison, this was the ultimate validation of his life's work. The system worked, even under the most extreme pressure. In his final years, Madison returned to his role as a philosopher and elder statesman. From Montpelier, he watched the nation he helped create continue to evolve. He corresponded with a new generation of leaders, offering his wisdom and counsel. He championed education, believing that an informed citizenry was the ultimate guardian of liberty, and he played a key role in founding the University of Virginia alongside his friend, Thomas Jefferson. He also confronted the deep, tragic contradiction of his life and his era: slavery. Madison owned enslaved people throughout his life, yet he also wrote about the institution with deep unease, recognizing it as a stain on the nation as soul and a fundamental betrayal of the principles of liberty he espoused. He wrestled with this conflict until the very end, a poignant reminder that even the most brilliant minds can be bound by the profound injustices of their time. So, as we reflect on James Madison, what is the ultimate lesson? It is a powerful and hopeful one, that ideas, not just power, build nations. Madison was not a charismatic general or a fiery orator. He was a scholar, a thinker, a writer. His power came from the force of his intellect, the clarity of his logic, and his unwavering dedication to the principle of ordered liberty. He believed that a government, properly structured, could be a force for good, securing the rights and happiness of its people. The legacy of James Madison is not a monument of stone, but the living, breathing, and often messy process of American democracy itself. It's in every election we hold, every law that is passed, every court case that is decided. It's in the ongoing debate about the balance of power, the rights of the individual, and the future of the republic. Madison left us with a challenge: to be active, engaged citizens, to understand the framework he gave us, and to continually strive to form a more perfect union. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the life and legacy of James Madison. It's been an incredible journey. If you've enjoyed this series and want to see more content like it, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support truly means the world. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.